So, Berto, I thought we'd just do kind of a rambly episode in which we
ramble on.
We respond to emails from the listeners. What do you say?
Yeah, let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I am a therapist and a professor. Sometimes I just want to mix it up because I feel like I say the same goddamn thing every time.
Iambic pentameter. My name is Humberto Castañeda. I repair guitar strings.
So why?
Sometimes they break,
Yeah.
and I hate to see broken guitar strings. So what I do is I wind them back up to, like I do the little... I turn them around themselves.
You're a recycle, reuse.
Yeah, but they can't be used for guitars anymore at that point. So I use them for other things.
Like what?
For example, I have a very large garbage can, and I like to fill it up with those. That's one use case.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay.
There's others.
So I got this email from, I don't know if it was a listener or not, but I got this email a week ago, and it's a guy named Justin Ehrlich. So Ehrlich reminds me of...
Ehrlich Bachman.
Yeah. And LAC at the end, and I looked that up, and it's a licensed acupuncturist person. Hi, my name is Justin Ehrlich, and I help high achievers overcome their chronic emotional struggles. I have a few content ideas that I think would be very valuable for your audience. Have you considered featuring a Taoist life coach on your podcast before? And I get emails like this all the time.
Whoa.
And so I just ignored it because there are times when I'll respond. I'll be like, oh, that sounds interesting. Yeah, let's talk. But I was like, I don't know, Taoist life coach.
I want to hire this guy to help me out.
Okay. Well, anyway, so I just ignored it. I didn't, I get emails like this all the time.
Right.
I think there's just this list of podcasts and people just spam you,
I see.
But 7 days later today, just before you showed up, Berto, he wrote again.
Oh.
He says, hi, not sure if you're interested in creating valuable content for your audience, but if you'd like to know what types of tips I can provide to help your audience have more successful and meaningful lives, reply and I'll send a few along. Justin Ehrlich, licensed acupuncturist. But I just love...
I don't think you're interested.
But I just love this sentence. Not sure if you're interested in creating valuable content for your audience, but...
Not sure you're interested in breathing oxygen, but... I found this one weird tip will make you breathe oxygen.
Yeah. Not sure if you actually want to have good content or not, but anyway.
Are you interested in quality?
Yeah.
Do you want to make more money? Sure, we all do.
I just love that insulting language. It's like, yeah. Well, Justin Ehrlich, licensed acupuncturist, you won me over with your insulting neg.
I was going to hire him before, but now I'm not sure.
All right. Patron Daniel emailed us 3 years ago, and I have had this on the list for you and I to talk about for 3 years.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, it's about Snapchat and LOL and what was going on 3 years ago. No, I don't know. He says, I'm doing a psychology degree and our biopsychology course talked about evolutionary psychology. My instructor believes that he knows exactly what happened millions of years ago. He's sure that animal observations are 100% applicable to humans. Many of the claims are often just speculative and adjusted to support the evolutionary theory. According to him, women do not enjoy sex, and they never fantasize about sex. If you are a woman that enjoys sex, then you must be abnormal. Men are, of course, more intelligent and stronger than women, and rape is completely normal. By the way, David Buss was his supervisor, and apparently Buss always made sure to only work with young, attractive women. Berto, what do you think about this?
Well, okay, first of all, if this were all true and accurate, that seems pretty problematic. It does sound a little extreme in the narrative. I just find it hard to believe that, but maybe that this person is really that extreme. Like, I'm imagining these lectures, like, listen, just as a matter of fact, just so y'all know, I want the woman to stand over here, the man to stand over. Okay, you over here on my left, you're all inferior and you don't like sex. Oh, you say you do? Okay, you're weird. Get out. I don't know. It sounds a little extreme, but...
Yeah, rape is completely normal. That kind of stuff. But the notion that there are those in evolutionary psychology that absolutely believe that they have, very strong, definitive evidence that women evolved to protect their eggs and to be only interested in attachment and women and men evolved to be only interested in spreading their seed all over the place and really not that interested in attachment, because if they can just be,
that seems like a more successful genetic strategy for
genders
for maximizing the quality of the, like if someone was designing better algorithms for creatures to procreate, and you had designed a human that had a male with tons, trillions and trillions of sperm, and a female with limited number of eggs, then I would think that the strategy one would follow would be something along those lines.
You would also think that our eyeballs would not be so fucking vulnerable because they're so important to us, and that we need to blink all the time, But biology doesn't always make sense, right? Yeah. It would also make sense that we wouldn't have an appendix that would blow up and kill us. It would also make sense that we wouldn't live in a world where viruses kill us periodically.
Right. I think what happens though is that there is an advantage in evidence from the standpoint of, well, some strategies seem to have worked enough for this one species to be around right now, and hence you have to conclude that some factors seem to be more successful than other factors, and then you can try to figure out which ones that might be. But I think what we're arguing here is that some of these folk think they have that solution. Right. They have that solved.
Yeah, the idea that we evolved is irrefutable. Irrefutable?
Yeah.
Uncontestable.
Yeah.
Obvious. Evidence-based. We evolved. The idea that we have an evolved psychology, that we have evolved certain instincts, is obvious. The idea that women evolved to not like sex and men evolved to be obsessed with sex is not demonstrated by evidence, especially when you look at cross-cultural, cross-history. Even when you just study individuals, there are plenty of women who think about sex all the time and fantasize about sex and aren't interested in being tied down to anybody.
Like, you could have a counter hypothesis that goes something like this. Because a woman, it's very easy for a man to ejaculate, and guarantee, unless they have some sort of medical problem or something, guarantee that tons of sperm will be in that ejaculate, right? It's fairly easy, in general. But it's not easy necessarily to actually get pregnant at all times of the month and at all cases and blah, blah. So counter hypothesis could be that women evolved to grab any guy they can at all times and fuck me, ejaculate, more.
Yeah, that women evolved to have sex with 100 women a day just to make sure that they get pregnant, right?
Yeah, but men evolved, on the other hand,
to be very selective.
Because, yes, of course, it's easy to come, but here's the problem. They want to have the best mate possible because their next baby needs to be really, really perfect.
Right. It's all, and I love the way you're pointing this out, because I have finally brainwashed you.
I know. All I'm saying is I agree with you.
That story doesn't resonate with a bias of what is natural, quote unquote, and doesn't self-serve male theorists who want to fantasize about a natural state of having sex with as many women as possible, because that's their fantasy, apparently. And so,
and justification. Because one could look, I don't know who these people are, and I'm certainly not speaking for all evolutionaries. Like, all I'm saying is, even myself, I'll admit, when I was a younger person, me and some of my buddies would have conversations along the lines of, "Hey, such and such, it's just natural.
It's men.
It's just men, right?" And what I've come to realize, partially from conversation with you and just kind of looking around the world and things like that, is
brainwashing.
Certainly, what one might assume is like the norm or what should be the way and stuff like that is way the hell more complicated than you might think.
Right. And it might even be true, but impossible at this stage to demonstrate given our technologies. And that's the other thing I just want to say is, as I've always said, people like Drain came to me we were talking about something, and somehow evolutionary psychology came up. And he's like, "Oh, well, I know you hate evolutionary psychology." And I'm like, "Oh my God. People, listen to me. I love evolutionary psychology. I love evolution. I love psychology. What's not to love about the idea of evolutionary psychology?" some evolutionary psychology science is sound and interesting and totally relevant and coherent. What I'm talking about is in evolutionary psychology, under my anecdotal findings, there is a much higher rate of extremely dubious science being published in respectable evolutionary psychology journals and being propped up by the industry as hard science, and they're often politically problematic, in addition to also just being not likely hard science.
What happened is when you and I first encountered each other on this topic, which was now several years ago, I don't even know, but it was a long time ago. What happened is I
first started studying it in 12, I think.
Okay.
So
I actually, of course, I hadn't studied evolutionary psychology, but I had read books that I guess I didn't realize were based on such kind of thing. But to me, what happened is I had heard some arguments being made in those books without the studies to back them up that sounded really plausible, right? And so when we had our first encounter around this, I was just taking it as a given. And I was saying, oh, look at the size of the breast or whatever, right?
And that's the problem is that not only is it a problem in the evolutionary psychology and its related fields that they publish these studies as if it's hard science and true, but it's very sexy to the public. And when they read articles about these studies by journalists that don't really know how to look at these things critically, and you have evolutionary psychologists talking, with a lot of authority as if these things are, hard science and definitely true, you have a society that basically just takes it all in. Like, well, scientists proved this and that, and you're basically lying to people. Look, it'd be like if it's similar to 500 years ago when someone would look up, or just even a couple hundred years ago, they would look in a telescope up at Mars and they go, we have proven that there are aliens on Mars because we see canals. Because when they, because there's a lot of canyons on Mars. And originally what they thought they saw, and they actually kind of draw it out because it was real fuzzy. What we know them to now be is just these giant Grand Canyons on Mars. By the time it looked like roads, essentially, between different cities. And so those people, they could have said, I don't know what it is, but maybe it's roads and maybe there are aliens. But
that's our current working theory.
But we don't know. Right. It could just be something we can't think of. But instead, what they said back then was, we have proven there are aliens on Mars. Right. Now, that's what a lot of evolutionary psychologists are doing today. They're looking through a very fuzzy microscope and they are drawing conclusions. And maybe it's true because maybe there were aliens on, I mean, there weren't, we know that, but there could have been. Back, if I lived 200 years ago, I'd be like, well, maybe. So these evolutionary psychologists could be right. Could be right, but but they're not demonstrating it in a strong enough way for me and many others people who, this isn't just me, it's a lot of people who have integrity in science. They look at a lot of these claims and they're like, well, maybe, but you're not really making a strong argument, and you're talking about it as if you've proven it. Yeah. And you're reporting it to the public as if it's a done deal, and it's not a done deal.
Where I think you and I have had more recent disagreements is, and it might just be a mischaracterization on my part, but I have at times felt that you were biased in favor of the cultural explanation for something, but from my perspective, potentially lacking the same said conclusive evidence. And that's just been, I don't remember the specific instances. But,
I will admit that I am probably biased in a false, wrong-headed way toward culture and learning as a explanation for human behavior, because I'm so fucking tired of everyone.
You're trying to
everyone is the opposite of me. Do you know what I mean? I except for feminists and social constructionists, and there are those people, but especially you and like all lay people, like you bring up the idea that some of their ideas about food and music and their preferences for like color are based on culture and learning, they'll be like, that's ridiculous. Red is just an attractive color. And I'm just like, you know, and
you have certainly swayed me a lot in these years on that front.
Like no one says that it's natural to speak English, right? Because it's so obvious that different cultures have different languages. But when you say your preference for girls wearing pink and boys wearing blue is cultural, they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So pink is clearly a feminine color, you know, and it's just like, you run into this wall and you're just like, you know, you can understand language being cultural, but you can't understand other preferences being cultural.
Where I've run, and this isn't so much with you, but I have had debates that do start losing me is take language. This isn't a specific debate I've had, but I could imagine this happening where we, you know, there's, I forget the percentage, but a lot of languages have a very similar word for the first few words that you can make. And so, of course, a reasonable hypothesis would be, well, that's probably because the human throat, like vocal cords, can only make certain sounds to start with.
Sure.
And those would probably easily get associated with the most important things, like ma, right? Da, right? Okay. So, but I feel like in the past, I've had some debates, maybe with an extreme feminist or two, where I felt that it was impossible to imagine that anything was there at birth.
No, absolutely. And I don't consider that to be level-headed. When I have given presentations on evolutionary psychology, one of the questions that I've asked people is, do you believe that we are born with some instincts?
Right.
You know, just say, like, what's your opinion? Do you think that we're born with just any instinct?
Yeah.
And I will find that people who are like that will be like, no, I don't think
it's all programmed.
It's all learned. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like,
clearly you get hungry.
like the urge to suckle a breast.
Right.
You know, that's a behavior.
That's patriarchal.
You know, it's like the urge to look into the eyes of the mother while you're breastfeeding.
Right.
The urge to want to take a shit. The urge to want to be held. The preference for warmth and to be, you know, swaddled. Like, and then extend from there, like the preference for safety, the preference for people who look like you know, like.
And for me, like I certainly view a continuum of the universe has micro programs at the quantum level, let alone if there's anything underneath that, right? And then hence why when certain quanta get together, they form particles, and when those particles get together and so forth. And then you get to DNA, and DNA is a program, and certainly the raw state of the brain has its own little program to build new connections and all these things. So I think we can certainly agree on that. What I have definitely conceded in, maybe if not explicitly, I will do so now, is that I have come to appreciate that just because something makes logical sense as we say it, with our understanding of the world the way we think it is, doesn't make it a fact. Doesn't mean that it is. And even though I haven't used that in physics or math, for some reason when it came to these biological topics, I was swayed. You know, I was swayed by, well, yeah, why are breasts shaped like butts? That would, you know, whatever, right?
Right. Like, no one is like, well, I feel like pi is 4.14.
Right.
You know,
in fact, when they used to do that, there was, I forget where it was, they passed a law, this is like 1,000 years ago or something, where it's like pi is 3. Oh, I know what it was. Because of because of the Bible, there was a thing where pi had to be like
a whole number.
It was 3 point
or 3 because of the Trinity or something.
Yeah, something like that. I'm totally butchering it, but when that has happened, that's the wrong thing to do.
Right. But no one does that today.
Right.
But when it comes to psychology, everyone's like, well, I don't know. I feel like men are this way and women are that way.
In fact, the only analogs that I can think of right now are when you actually watch non-cynical, honest flat earthers. Because the arguments are actually along these lines. They say things like, listen, look out at a river or a lake. Do you see water curving? No. Water doesn't curve. Water lays flat. It just makes sense, right? Yeah. And then if you actually just like try to approach that for anything, you could kind of make some crazy arguments that way.
Yeah. So maybe this is the last time we'll ever talk about evolutionary psychology, so I just want to kind of ramble for a second. I haven't talked about this, I don't think. I was on a radio show a couple years ago, and it was a debate. I think a listener had a radio show or something, and I was on the radio show, and it was a debate between two people who are critical of evolutionary psychology and two people who were pro-evolutionary psychology. And they actually had a professor of evolutionary psychology from East Coast or something. And we were going back and forth, and I was getting hot. You know, I was getting upset. And at some point, he's like, "Well, Kirk, let me tell you this study that we did at the university." And he proceeds to talk about how they did this study, and they found that when they gave information, that basically the study concluded, and I'm pretty sure this is what it concluded, was that people, if they're biased, it will affect the way they interpret things. But what he did it on were people who were anti-evolutionary psychology. And so what he was telling me was, look, Kirk, these anti-evolutionary psychology people interpreted this wrongly because of their ideology. And I was like, yeah, no doy. And people that are pro-evolutionary psychology also do that. So what's your point? Like, he thought he had slam dunk, like eliminated me. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly my point, professor. People think from a place of bias, and they use motivated reasoning based on what they hope to be true. Yeah, you're right.
Right. So it would have been the stronger case in his side if you're like, you know, first we established that we found the gene that controls belief in evolutionary psychology. And second, if you have that gene, you answer incorrectly in these cases.
Or more realistically, we proved that people who believe in evolutionary psychology are not biased because of blah, blah, blah.
Right.
You know what I mean? Whereas people who are anti-psycho, you know. Again, I just want to say, there's a lot of things that we likely evolved in terms of psychology. We evolved to have a drive for sex. We evolved to have a drive to eat food, particularly salt, fat, and sugar. We evolved to build attachments. We evolved to avoid rejection from the tribe. That seems pretty ingrained in all of us. We want acceptance from our tribe. We evolved to avoid pain. We don't like things painful. We evolved to prefer pleasurable things like the sun on our face and a nice cold drink of water. We evolved to express our fundamental emotions in probably very similar ways, like pain and disgust and joy. You know, we smile, or when we're disgusted, we make a face and we like recoil. And when we're in pain, emotional pain, we might cry. You know, these are things that are likely instinctual, and we evolved those mechanisms. We evolved to not like ammonia or you know, puke or poop. You know, I can't remember the list of things that we evolved that is universal cross-cultural things that we don't like. But, you know, we evolved to do that. But beyond that, it's hard to know what is learned and what is evolved and what's in our DNA. We might figure out with some technology later on that there are, you know, non-cultural huge differences between men and women that are exhibited in our culture. Like a current argument, like people like Jordan Peterson are making, is that men evolved to prefer activities that involve things like engineering and science and that kind of thing, and women evolved to engage in things like teaching kindergartners and that kind of stuff. Yeah, and now maybe, you know, there it could be. But we don't have a way of actually measuring that today, because we all grow up in a culture that proposes gender as a construct. Now, again, I just want to say, I'm not saying it's not true. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's a lot of evidence that kind of points in a lot of different directions. You know, because as our society becomes more equal, so to speak, without a better, you know, term, we find that women the differences between men and women start to close. Yeah. Now, what Jordan Peterson and other people say is, but it still hasn't closed completely, even in some of the most egalitarian societies like Norway and Sweden.
Well, he makes an argument that in those societies, the differences get exacerbated, exacerbated. because, and I have not looked at the data or whatever, but he says, he gives an example of one of those countries, Norway or one of them, and he says that they're super, maybe it's Sweden, it's super egalitarian, all these things, and yet you have more women in blah, blah, blah profession and more blah, blah. Right. Again, I haven't looked at the data, but I will say this. So the part that I fully agree with you is, and I have come to realize that, right, is what I thought was evidence initially, I was using good sounding arguments, right? And if you have one meta point, is like, that's not how science works, right? Okay, so totally agree. The other part, and it sounds like you sort of agree with me too, is that it's also not easy to know what's culture, right? Like, yeah. And one point that I've made before is, even if in some cases, even if we agreed that something is caused by culture, doesn't mean we can fix it easily. Because whether it's genetic or deeply, deeply cultural, I guess the genetic part is even harder to fix, but the deeply, deeply cultural issues, they're not easy to fix either, you know?
Well, that's a whole other question, you know, fixing or
changing, I should say.
Or engineering.
Yeah,
you know?
so like if we said, okay, we've proved it. Boys prefer blue because of culture, and for some reason we wanted to change it. It's not something you can just flip a switch, right? Like you'd have to have massive re-education over years and years.
Yeah. Right. So the Jordan Peterson argument, which isn't just his, it's a lot of people, is, again, it's based on observation. You're not actually experimenting on people. Yeah. You didn't take a group of people and actually raise them in different contexts and see what happens. You're actually looking at a country, and according to their claim, it has completely erased gender as a construct in their society, which I find to be extremely unlikely. Yeah. That in Sweden there's no gender construct around what occupations.
Right, that premise is already like
the premise is ridiculous. Now, again, I'm not saying it's not true.
Yeah.
By refuting their claim, I'm not saying it's not true. What I'm saying is they have not demonstrated its truth. In the same way that 200 years ago, they did not demonstrate there were aliens on Mars. If I was 200 years ago and thought the way I did now, I'd be like, you have not demonstrated there are Martians. You have looked at something and you're drawing conclusions. Maybe there are Martians, but you haven't proven it to me yet.
Now, one caveat is, which I think the Mars example is good, but one could say that at different times in history, there have been proofs for certain things that later on new data arose, and those proofs were no longer sufficient or correct, right? So you know, as an example, there were, and I don't mean mathematical proofs, I mean more like evidence. You know, there was evidence pointing in the direction of things like Pluto. Let's take Pluto, a simple example. Pluto is a planet. Right? Everyone knows Pluto is a planet.
It's actually not a planet.
Well, exactly. Because new evidence came up and people were like,
new designation came up.
Fine, right? Okay, maybe that's a bad example. But, or gravity, what am I talking about? Like, so let's take Newtonian physics, right? There was quote unquote evidence, proof that was based on evidence that that's how physics works, right? And then new evidence came about and they had to say, actually, that's not how the universe works. It's close, but not. Right. Here's a new thing. And so it is true that
for those not wanting to talk about relativity.
Yeah. So it is true that you can have something that is for now agreed upon as like, yeah, this is how the world works.
Is it relativity? Is that the...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because what happened, anyways. So this is how the world works. We have this evidence.
I just didn't know if that was the name of his theory that explained gravity. Did relativity explain gravity?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't explain it reframes the relationship between...
Right.
Yeah. Because we still don't really know, like...
Well, Newton, it was a force, you know, similar to, you know, nuclear forces or something, or magnetism. But what Einstein demonstrated was that it's related to space-time.
Yeah, exactly. And like the big difference is that
mass is related.
The frame of reference.
The point is I think I get what you're saying, but I don't see how it relates.
Well, what I'm saying is that
I think if you're getting at this,
the distinction I'm making is that we can't. I don't think we should just say, hey, you cannot agree on anything until it's completely proven.
No.
Because there's never a complete proof.
No. Right. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like speculate away, but couch it in the fact that you're fucking speculating.
Well, but no, I'm going a little stronger. I'm saying, no, we could agree on a view of the world based on evidence.
We can
and
agree,
later find out that we were incorrect or incomplete.
No,
and
that's
I'm saying
not how
that
science.
happens.
That's not how science works. You agree on the data. So what you agree on is that
theory based
is that women in the United States are among people who want to be a preschool teacher. For whatever reason, more women want to be a preschool teacher than men, right?
Yes.
If you want to be an engineer, for whatever reason, more men want to be an engineer than women. Okay, you can say that. That's data. That's hard science. We know that. Now, why is that true?
Right.
Now, everyone with respectable intelligence and knowledge of this area would say, well, it's at least a little bit cultural, if not entirely cultural, and it's possible that it's biological as well. Right. And if not entirely biological, but we know it's at least somewhat cultural. Now, how much of that is impossible for us to determine at this point? We don't know. We can start to study it, and we can start to accumulate different angles of looking at this, but until we have the ability to experiment on actual humans, my guess is I just thought of it today, or maybe I thought about it before, is at some distant future, we'll have the ability to model DNA in a computer and epigenetics. And God, I can't, it'd basically be like some advanced matrix of some kind. And you would actually run models on humans and experiment on their upbringing. But that would be awful.
You could find,
the ethics of like taking a sentient being and actually like experimenting on them.
But you could find direct gene relationships to certain things too. But
no, you can't. It's not.
You can.
You can. When you actually talk to genetic researchers, there's no gene for engineering.
Of course not. But there are genes directly related to more specific things than just,
like certain brain processes,
sure.
kind of. But the brain is this massive complex thing, and so many genes are related to it, and a lot of epigenetics are related to it as well. So, and certain genes will get turned on by culture. So when you expose children, boys or girls, to particular things, certain genes get turned on, some get turned off. So that just finding a gene that's related to a particular process in the brain isn't enough. You have to, again, you still have to take them out of the culture.
I know. But sometimes I feel like we're saying that, therefore, it's impossible to even start, which I know is not what you're saying.
No. And what I'm saying everyone just has to say that they're just unsure.
Right. But what I'm trying to say about science, I do disagree with this, is there was agreement, at least some years after Newton proposed his laws of motion and his laws of physics, essentially, that's the way the world worked.
Yeah, it was a good
evidence
model.
Matched his model.
Exactly. Right. The evidence was there.
Right. So what I'm saying is that it is possible today that if enough evidence starts matching a model, then people would agree, even if they're wrong.
Yes, if that's your point, great. If the evidence creates a good theory, a good model, I will celebrate. Right. I would love there to be enough evidence to create an evolutionary psychology model that would demonstrate exactly how genders and occupations work. Like, that would be awesome. It just doesn't exist right now. When Newton came up with his laws of physics, all you had to do was grab, certain things and drop them, and you experimented. You take a big rock and a small rock and you drop it off a building and they both land at the same time,
Yeah, like only in one part of the world, right? Only in a certain atmosphere, only in one planet, only in one climate type, only in one, right? Only,
but there were a lot of
only.
But then he started looking at planets. He started looking at suns.
It took a long time to experiment over and over and over and over to start validating that it was correct.
And it was validated over and over again. The model was valid.
But his hypothesis and theory was not formed after hundreds of years of experiments, right? It was building upon previous stuff.
Yeah, he built on previous people. 1, 2. It's a hard science that you can measure. You don't have to, the rock doesn't have to consent to being in a study, and you don't have to ask the rock a question. Like, what sort of job do you want, rock? You just drop it off of the building.
Right, but I could say something like, humans may not necessarily behave like the rock, and you can't drop a human to test it.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm saying like even with physics, right? Just using your same kind of problem statement, I would say, well, you actually can't run a lot of these physics experiments on humans ethically.
I know.
Right?
What's your point?
Well, do we know that physics applies exactly the same to humans?
Physics applies to humans, yes.
How do we know that?
Because if I punch you in the face, there's a force that happens. And
but you can't ethically test that, right?
No, I can't ethically divide,
right.
But I can also watch boxing matches.
Right. And so we triangulate from a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And then we sort of agree. We agree, yeah, gentleman's agreement, scientists' agreement, not gentleman's agreement.
Well, I don't know what your point is,
that we don't actually have perfect experiments and perfect proof for anything.
No. Right. But there's enough data points.
Yeah.
And in physics, there is over time, scientists are brilliant enough to come up with elegant and numerous different experiments to validate certain observations and certain findings.
And honestly,
when they do it over and over again.
Right.
When it comes to psychology, you have to ask humans what they think. You have to ask them what they feel. You're asking, and then you also watch them as they grow in a complex world and choose a career. You know, like the advertising and TV shows and heroes and some women go into engineering,
right? And
some men are preschool teachers. So how does that make any sense? And we're not talking like gay dudes become, fully, red-blooded, like super heterosexual masculine men become preschool teachers. And so the claims need to be couched in that. And there are responsible evolutionary psychologists and related fields who actually are publishing studies. They provide the limitations. They provide the caveats. When they give TED Talks, they provide the, well, we're speculating here. But guess what? No one wants to watch that. It doesn't get watched on YouTube.
Right.
And, men's rights activists don't spread that around because it doesn't match their narrative that men are better and somehow masculinity is this like inherent thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, all I would just want to do is tell people, just travel to India or travel to Tokyo and tell me that American masculinity is the masculinity. Because I'm here to tell you that masculinity in Tokyo is bizarre to you.
Oh, but that's because they're not white Americans.
Right. Or they're weird. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, well, they're men. They're born,
different race.
Different race. Totally different. It's like, nope. That's one thing we do know is genetically the difference between a white American or a white European descendant and a Japanese person is almost zero. The differences between Japanese people are greater than the difference between white people and Japanese people. Anyway, so let me just give one, and then I'll never talk about evolutionary psychology again because I'm sure I'm pissing off everyone. And that's the thing. Like,
I don't know that you are.
I think I am. I believe me, people fucking hate it when I talk about this.
But you're being way more reasonable today than I've heard you be sometimes.
It'll still bother people.
Okay.
I mean, I make no friends. Do you know how tempting it is for me to like just go with the flow and like spout about, do you know how much of a bummer it is to me when I open my fucking mouth at a dinner party when someone's going like, well, we evolved, and like I'm just holding my tongue, biting my tongue. I'm just like, Kirk, don't argue with them. I read in Psychology Today that we evolved to rape people or whatever they say. And I'm just like, like, it's self-destructive, to have this point of view. So there's a lot of incentives for me not to have this point of view. And for me to have this, it's only because I believe that it's just so obvious, when you actually look at all this science. For example, there's a widely held belief in evolutionary psychology that when women are ovulating, that they prefer masculine men more. Have you heard that one?
Yep.
Widely held belief in evolutionary psychology and beyond. Obvious. They've done tons of studies, lots of replication. When women are ovulating, they prefer, who's a masculine man?
Like
Javier Bardem. And when they're not ovulating, they like Brad Pitt or something.
No, you got to go the guy Jesse Eisenberg.
Well, yeah, right. So that's a widely held, belief. They've done lots of studies with that. And they talk about it as if it's fact, and they've done it for decades. But the research that has been done so far has massive limitations. And that's what the lay people don't understand. And what scientists, I don't think, talk about enough is like, when you actually look at the research, the effect size might be very small.
Yeah.
2, there are plenty of studies out there that don't even find that or find the opposite, but no one talks about that because it doesn't fit the narrative. Also, many studies have extremely small sample sizes. Also, many studies there'll be p-hacking, which I can't even get into right now. And also, as I've talked about before, a lot of
basically they're picking participants on purpose.
No, p-hacking is a statistical trickery in which you find a way to find significance among lots of different measures. The idea goes is like, if you study 100 things in a study, some of them are going to be significant differences by random chance. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, so college kids are often the participants, and they're often in one place in the world, the northeast of the United States. We're talking like Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, MIT. This is where all of the students are. What's the likelihood they represent the entire human race that's ever lived? Okay, recent research has looked into this question, and they have established a better method, more robust, more people involved, and they have found that women's preference isn't affected at all by their menstrual cycle. There's no signal at all. So as women are ovulating, they don't prefer
one or the other.
Javier Bardem. They prefer Javier Bardem all the time over
Jesse Eisenberg.
Jesse Eisenberg.
Except when he's got the haircut from No Country for Old Men.
Even then, I mean, come on, that's a sexy dude. Now, maybe more research will come out, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is evolutionary psychology is propped up on these extremely limited studies. I've talked about before, I've seen firm conclusions from evolutionary psychologists based on 15 participants.
Wow.
Again, if they just said, this says only 15 people from the northeast of the United States. Right. So I think
here's an interesting finding from 15 people. We want to look more into this.
Right. Another excellent video on YouTube that I actually put on our website. If you go to the links page or whatever, Rebecca Watson, someone actually sent it to me. Rebecca Watson made this video, and she attacked a particular study of evolutionary psychology that claimed to have found something. And when she actually looked at the study, it didn't demonstrate that at all, and there were all the limitations and problems and stuff. So anyway, the point is that obviously we evolved instincts. Yeah. All you got to do is look at all the other animals to know that
that's a thing.
That's a thing. Plus, all you got to do is look at babies and know that's a thing. All you got to do is look at different siblings who are raised in almost identical situations to know that people have different personality traits when they're born. Of course, the environment will shape that greatly, but biology plays a role in our psychology. Knowing exactly what weight biology versus culture, and to some extent, it's a philosophical silliness because we are never just biology. Right. We always are involved in culture.
And one could argue that this is kind of what I was getting at earlier. DNA currently for our technology is a harder thing to change than maybe trying to change someone's mind over several years in some ways, right? Meaning, you can see what I'm saying, right? Like you could try to educate someone for 10 years in a certain direction. You cannot sort of now, but not mostly edit their DNA.
CRISPR.
Right? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like you're almost there, but not quite yet, right? Like I can't grab a human being, be like, okay, this is gone, we're putting these new in. It's coming, but not quite. You could try to re-educate them over 10, 20 years, 30 years or something in some regards, right? But what I'm trying to get at is that in practical terms, for a lot of the things that we're talking about, they are still problems for society.
Well, that's a whole other thing, and I'm glad you're bringing it up because maybe people are thinking that's what I'm talking about. I'm not even talking about that. Sure. Like that's like a completely separate thing. Like to me, that's irrelevant. Like the notion that like we're born racist or we're taught to be racist, I don't even care.
That's fair.
We just can't be racist. It doesn't matter if it's natural or not. It's not okay. You know?
The flip side to it is, one thing that I have seen is folks arguing on a side that is trying to argue for justice for a new group or for a new way of thinking. One thing that I have seen is a lack of empathy for sometimes the reality that even if it is all cultural in some cases, it's not something you can just tell someone, you're wrong, you got to change, and then they change.
Right.
And so I know it's a totally different topic.
Well,
but
it's related. And so, for example, with girls entering STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. There's, a group of people that are like, we have to change that. So we have to create a 50-50 thing.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Well, you encourage girls to do better. You try to protect girls from thinking that they're shitty at it.
Yeah.
You try to have role models that are women in STEM. You try to make the activities perhaps more feminine in some way, more feminine examples, you know, so to speak. I don't know. I think most people will be like, okay, that's fine. But by the way, one of the things that they resort to sometimes that the conservative people will be upset, like Jordan Peterson, is they'll create quotas. They'll say like half of all of your STEM students at MIT need to be female. Yeah. And, that's affirmative action essentially. And what they'll say is like, that is counter to biology. And what I would say is it might be.
Well, and I would say even if it weren't, I don't think who said, why is 50-50 the right approach to something in particular? Like, let's say we said the right number of ratio of male to female cops should be 50-50. I'm like, why? What's the rationale? Like, we should explore that a little bit. If it's like, well, we want to share equally in society's burden to be cops. Okay, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it's a very weird conversation that I don't have the answer for, because one of the classic affirmative action things that we've done in this country is at a certain point we said, well, African Americans in our country have been oppressed and kept down and forced to not get an education, and because the education isn't in their family of origin, and they don't have haven't been taught a culture, and they don't have the social capital and the legacy to get into particular universities, a black boy or girl is already at a disadvantage just because of their race. And it's because of racist white people doing that to previous generations that they start, 10 yards back on the 100-yard dash. So the solution is to do all those things of trying to reach out to black people. And you know what? Maybe their test scores don't need to be as good. Yep. And that was morally okay for that group. And so for that instance, and I agree with that, in a lot of instances, there's nuances to that, but it's just like, okay, makes sense. Well, what some people say is, well, what's the difference between a legacy of women being kept down in certain fields, and why can't we have affirmative action in that way? Why can't we lower their test score thresholds to let them in? And I don't know the answer to that. My point is that the claim that we know that men are this way and women are that way, in things like that is extremely difficult. Because, and what people on the right will often say, or people who are pro-biology will say, is like, well, all you got to do is look at like 7-year-olds. There's differences. Well, it doesn't take a genius to know that like
by 7,
you've been socialized as a gender.
And I'm just saying it cuts both ways. It should cut both ways, meaning just as I'm agreeing, you cannot conclude that, well, that's just the way men are biologically, right? It's just like, you also can't conclude that they're not, and therefore everything has to be 50-50, and everything should, like the extreme, right? And I know this sounds like an extreme, but like birth, it should be 50-50. 50% of births should be given by men.
Yeah. So you and I are dictators of the world.
Yes.
would you agree, co-consul of the world, Humberto, that
50% of the co-consuls should be Humbertos.
that we would initiate a program that would try to account for the cultural bias that has been studied, by the way. You know, like what they find is like when a girl is 7, she loves math just as much as the 7-year-old boy. By the time she's like 10, 13, she thinks she's stupid when it comes to math.
She can't do math. She's a girl.
Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't take a genius.
Math is hard.
Right. God. Yeah, I mean, God, that's like a real thing that Barbie said. Okay. And so, you know, we're not out of the woods, you know, and so, we'll do everything we can to account for that. And maybe we'll have some slight affirmative action, but not like hard 50-50.
Right.
But like, you know, a little bit of encouragement. And then maybe one day down the road, when we've decided 300 years from now that we've completely eradicated the notion of gender and math, then we can measure the rates of women and men, you know, becoming math majors in universities. And maybe we'll find it's 60-40, or maybe we'll find it's 55-45, or maybe we'll find it's 70-30, you know, but we do know we've fucked up a little bit with our culture. So let's try to account for it at least a little bit, but let's not be so draconian and so like black and white to say that there are no differences between men and women. You know?
And this is, by the way, where I do get evolutionary, which I know we've even argued about before. But I actually do believe this goes back to a physical overpowering by males, just going back millions of years, which means that males got to make the rules for most of history, and that eventually turned into, well, males were the rulers of the city, of the country, of the empire. And males got to make the rules. So it's no surprise that males had the most choice. Males had the most freedom. Males had the most leisure time. Males had in that sense, overall, right? Not one by one, just overall. So I think of culture. It's not just that, as you know, culture is not just like, well, that's the thing we invented in the last 50 years. Culture, we have a baggage of thousands of years of culture. Yeah. So anyways, that's my point.
I mean, the notion of language is a cultural thing. You know, we don't sprout from the womb speaking. We get taught a language. So going back to, you know, our species 200,000 years ago, there was a culture around language, some kind of communication, and every human being on the planet has descended from just small iterations of whoever invented the first words, slowly morphed into every single language that we speak today, you know? And so...
and those phrases, you know, we are taught phrases and ideas that have come along for thousands of years that have sexism built into them.
Right.
So it's a form of genetics.
Right. So 200,000 years ago, there were ideas of men and women.
Yeah.
And, you know, who knows what they were, but those are cultural ideas.
Not to mention the incredible influence that religious systems play in the world. And when you're taught from the moment you're able to listen, the God, the creator, everything is this male, right? And his son, his very important son, is a male. And all the angels are they sound very male. They got male names. There's one woman in the story. She basically gave birth. Don't worry about her. She was a virgin. She was pure and virginal. And
it says in the scripture that men are the bosses.
They're the bosses.
And women
are... So then you're talking about culture. Absolutely. Right.
Yeah, it's written into religious laws.
Right. But it's not a culture that we just sprouted recently. It's been around for like ever.
All right. Well, we're in much need of a break. When we get back, let's talk about some other stuff. What do you say, Bruno?
Let's do it.
All right. We're back from the break. Berto, why should people become a patron of the podcast?
Well, we have a long tradition of really prioritizing patrons when it comes to emails, topics they want us to cover. They get featured. They get prizes. They come, you know, we really value our patrons at events we do. And actually, they're also supporting a show that I know you put in an incredible amount of work for this, and it's giving back, a set of tools and ideas that hopefully have some value for students of the field and things like that. In addition to that, their donations go to help great causes like, the pets and what other things are homelessness
and LGBTQIA youth.
Right.
Yeah. And the next thing we have on our list is if we get enough patrons, we need about 100 more. We will create a scholarship fund, and I don't know exactly what it would look like. Maybe like, I don't know if it'd be like 1 a year or 5 a year or something. We would actually give a scholarship for people who want to go to graduate school
to study evolutionary psychology. Sweet.
So along those lines, famous patron Lyndon wrote us, Berto, and he asked, what is losing its charm in 2018?
Oh, well, like what things are going out of vogue?
I don't know what he means. He just said, what is losing its charm?
Or is he asking, what does the phrase losing its charm mean in 2018? I'll tell you something that has lost its charm. No one says it's losing its charm in 2018. But, okay.
Well, he is Irish after all.
Yeah.
So
what's losing its lucky charms? All right. Let's see. Well, okay. I'll tell you what's lost some of its charm. Bands. Rock bands.
Oh. I mean, but specifically in 2018 as opposed to 2017.
Oh, well, it's getting... I see what you're saying.
I mean, I guess you could include that.
I mean, okay. It's just in 2018. I thought it meant like, it's coming
Over
to
time.
a head kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely rock bands. But, I go to music festivals and stuff, and I find that there's a lot of rock bands. And there's a lot of young people who make rock bands.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't necessarily...
It's just not as known, I guess.
Yeah. Like there's no Nirvana and there's no
Right.
Pearl Jam that we know of anyway.
Right.
Anyway.
Okay. Things lost its charm. There was social network wise. Let's see. Facebook is losing some charm.
Really? Oh, because of their bad press.
Yeah. Although I don't know if that really hurt them very much
in terms of
the long term.
In the actual numbers.
Yeah. What else is losing its charm? Certain shows lost. Oh, House of Cards. Okay, you know what's lost its charm?
Yeah.
The handsy executive male bosses.
Yeah.
That's lost its charm.
Yeah. Well, for me, I would say Star Wars saturation.
Ooh, that's lost its charm.
Because Han Solo came out and
I think it pushed it a little.
A precipitative, the amount of energy for Episode 7, Rogue One, Episode 8 was gigantic, and something happened in 2018 to Star Wars.
Star Wars has lost its charm.
Oh, by the way, someone wrote in and said we don't have to wait till December next year. May is when Episode 9 comes out.
Oh, so they just changed the schedule.
I guess so.
That's just kind of weird, man.
It's kind of fun to have December.
Yes.
Okay,
so you're right.
But also, it's bothersome because so many good movies come out in December, even just on Christmas Day. Yeah. Anyway.
What else lost its charm?
Well, I would say political humor for me has lost its charm. Like, I was in the.
It's like not funny anymore. You mean?
Yeah, it's not funny anymore. Like when I watch what's her face? She has a show.
The one she got in trouble recently
from the Daily Show.
Yeah. What is her name?
What is her name? God damn it. I loved her. I thought she was great on the Daily Show. I liked her show, and I'm just tired of it. It's like I don't know if it's just not funny or I see through the social construct of it all and the engineering around like, okay, great, is that all we do on the left is just ridicule the right? Is that our only recourse is just to make fun of them?
I actually had that years ago with the Daily Show when Bush was in office. I think it was probably during his second term or maybe even his first term. Yeah, I used to love the Daily Show. I used to love Jon Stewart. But as I kept watching and sort of like the realization, like what you're saying right now, that realization of, wait a minute, is this just our release valve? Because that's the only thing we can do?
Right. One, I think that there are many left leaning Americans who think that watching those shows is actually like a political activist.
Yeah, like it gets us somewhere.
Yeah. It doesn't get us any fucking way.
I actually think it has the opposite effect.
Totally
That's
has the
why
opposite
I stopped
effect.
watching
Like,
the Daily Show.
When the right sees clips, or when the right actually pulls clips, which is even worse, and shows what the left is paying attention to and holding up, it hurts their feelings.
Right. Right.
And then they clam up and they start attacking us.
And I'll say that I think it also has the opposite effect, even for the people watching, because it is a way to diffuse the strength of your convictions, kind of thing. Because you're like, yeah, it's a messed up world we live in.
Those people are so stupid.
Right. It's
and,
like, the
it has this illusion of like, well, we're all laughing at this, so obviously something's going to get done.
Right.
But it's like, not necessarily.
Yeah, like growing up in Colombia in the 80s, the three main things that were used to diffuse just how messed up everything was: 1, beauty pageants; 2, soccer; and 3, like parties or event, like carnivals or big parties and celebrations.
Oh yeah, didn't what's his face throw big parties?
Yeah.
Pablo Escobar.
Yeah.
Along those lines, soccer. World Cup.
Yeah.
Fever is going on right now.
Yeah, it's crazy right now. Colombia lost against Japan.
Oh, really?
My friend Shun and you are gonna dominate me. Damn it.
And I'm watching clips online, and there's some, these guys are just amazing athletes, and there's some amazing things happening, but the flopping and the complaining, it's weird. like you watch. Right. So YouTube, I don't know if it's YouTube that's making, but every game is like summarized highlights on YouTube right now. And if you watch like probably every other goal that's scored, you'll see like at least one
life-ending injury.
Yeah, like because you'll see at least one person flop, or you'll see one person just super complaining about something.
Right.
Like the goal keep will get scored on, and he'll immediately start pointing at someone. He'll just like, no, that was and it's just like, they're not, soccer dudes are not, wussies.
No, it's part of the culture, man.
It's because they're rewarded for doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's like, how in hockey, so growing up, there's no hockey in Colombia, okay? So growing up, whenever I would watch a hockey fight, like in a movie or TV or whatever, I thought that was this rare occurrence that was weird. Like, whoa, they're getting in a fight. I never realized that's part of the game.
Yeah, especially for the minor leagues, because Seattle used to have I don't know the exact. It was semi-pro,
right?
The Thunderbirds, and at that level, the crowd doesn't really care about like the game because
they just want the fights.
Yeah, they're just there to enjoy it and to get drunk. And if there wasn't not only one fight, you had to have
multiple
3 fights. There's a minimum of 3 fights.
Minimum formula.
And yeah, it was bizarre.
So soccer is similar.
They would throw their gloves off.
Oh yeah,
and the refs would let them fight because the refs work for the league.
Well, that's why I couldn't understand back in the Sega Genesis days and the Nintendo days, where the hockey game let you fight. Yeah. And at the time I thought, oh, that's a funny Easter egg that you can fight. But it's a thing.
Yeah,
I mean, soccer is similar in that, like
NHL, they try to crack down, but in the minor leagues, it was like, oh. Yeah.
So the soccer culture is that you need to get that penalty counted, right? So you need to make it sound and feel like you lost a head.
Yeah, and it is rewarded.
Right.
Now, this isn't to say that football, American football, or basketball, or I suppose baseball doesn't have people who are complaining and this kind of thing. But the ratio.
No, and also like in football, I think it's the opposite thing is glorified. You're not rewarded for, oh, he tripped me, right? Like it's like you're rewarded for, I took 20 dudes all ramming into my chest and I kept running.
Or I flung my body into someone else's. But so now it's a common American person thing to say, oh, the flopping and the complaining at soccer. But I know people I have Mexican friends that hate it too. It as someone who doesn't respect the players, because I don't know the players.
Right.
when I see it, it really turns me off to watching it. And I feel like that's just, and there are people I'm reading on Reddit, there's like, this shit's got to stop. Like the thing that it seems like there's two things you have to do. One is you have to tell the refs, stop rewarding it.
But it's like they just started watching soccer, though. This has always been the case.
But it's getting out of control.
You think so?
The other thing is like the amount of camera coverage today is so much more robust. Like back in the day, you had maybe 2 angles. Because the thing about soccer is you don't really need a lot of angles for cameras. You can just have one camera. You know what I mean? Whereas now, especially World Cup, you've probably got like 30 cameras like on these people and close-ups and slow-mo. And so what some people are saying is you have to find these people, or you have to have a review. You need to review the tape. You
need, because it's a slow sport, right? So you actually, historically, when when big soccer games would happen, most people couldn't even watch the broadcast because it was either not broadcast on TV or you might not even have a TV. So you would listen to the radio, right? And the announcers that announce soccer are so animated. I'm sure you've heard it.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like you turn this thing where it's like, in reality, it would be like, all right, he's coming up the field with the ball again. And, he's going to, no, never mind. Just so you know, listeners at home, they're passing it back and forth. Just imagine that. Instead, they're like, and he comes down the left. Oh my God, he's about to pass. Right? So they turn it into like this grandiose spectacle in your brain, right?
Yeah.
Which means if there's a foul, like a penalty or something, he's been torn down. His head came off. His legs are bleeding. It's like that kind of thing. And I think that just became the culture is that, we got to make it interesting. Just like baseball, when I watch baseball.
A better analogy is NASCAR. Like when there are car wrecks.
Sure.
Like there are a fair amount of people, me included, who really only want to watch the car wrecks. I'm not really that concerned with who wins this 500-mile race. You know what I mean? That doesn't, anyway, but the wrecks, you show me a clip of that, like I'm interested. Sure. You know what I mean? So maybe it's that too. I don't know.
I guess what I was trying to say about baseball is a different but related point, which is I think every sport's got its own little idiosyncrasies. And if you, like me not having grown up really with baseball, and when I first started watching baseball, I was always like, why do they keep spitting?
Yeah, I know. It is weird. Well, because they're bored out of their minds.
And they have chew. A lot of them had chew, right?
Yeah.
I never knew that.
But I want to say I grew up playing soccer. I played soccer.
But American soccer.
Right. And none of us flopped and none of us complained.
Yeah.
Like, it's only when you get up to that. And I had friends who played soccer in high school and they didn't flop and they didn't complain. It's only in this upper echelon when I think what happens is it's so competitive.
Yeah.
And they're so desperate to win. And every goal is so incredibly important.
Right.
That they use every single thing available to them. And again, if you let them get away with it, you don't yellow card them when they flop and do something untoward, then they're just going to keep doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Another question that FPL asked was, how do you and Berto unwind and blow off steam? Berto.
I let myself get taken down in a soccer game and I flop and no, just kidding. Let's see. How do I unwind? I'm assuming
I just want to say also, it doesn't, from my understanding, Messi doesn't flop very often. Like,
he doesn't?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
From what I understand, Messi, he just powers
kicks
through.
the hits and keeps on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I guess I have seen.
So there are some players that actually, as a matter of integrity, I'm guessing, they're just like, I'm just not going to flop.
Yeah.
If someone fouls me and the ref sees it, then it happens. But if they don't see it, I'm moving on because I want to score. You know what I mean?
All right. How do I unwind? All right. I have a couple things that work. One of them is I watch a funny show while drinking a nice brew, like a dark beer. That'll
really?
help me unwind. Yeah.
I didn't know that. So you have in your fridge a dark beer?
So I've tried to cut down because it's so many calories. But if I had a choice, like a stout, espresso stout or a Guinness or And
Why do you like that kind of beer?
Over the years I started liking that more and more because I think sort of the when I was younger and I would try beer, a lot of times it was like the Budweisers or things like that. And I hated how it was like kind of like flavored water. And I like
flavored water.
Water flavored. I like strong taste. You know, I love spicy food. I like all these things.
Yeah.
So stouts.
Well, I'm surprised
have a strong taste.
Not to hack on FPL's, glorious Guinness, but I find Guinness to not have that much taste, even though it's like black.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty light beer in my experience.
Interesting. Well, that's one way. The other way,
compared to other stouts, IPAs
sure.
and stuff.
Another way that I unwind is I will play some of my favorite video games on the PC.
Which are what?
Lately, I've gone back to real-time strategy games, namely Age of Empires, the definitive edition, which looks great in 4K, and StarCraft 2. I went back to StarCraft 2.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've dipped back into StarCraft 2 every now and then. That game came out, like 10 years ago?
Yeah.
And it's still being played.
Yeah.
They need to come out with Well,
remember they came out with 2 follow-ups that were, the Heart of the Swarm, and then the Heart of the Void or whatever. That can't be Legacy of the Void,
which is fine, but it wasn't like. And I think I played at least one of them, and which was fun, but it was like.
But it's not a new version. It's
which I don't care. You can have DLC. You don't need to. Anyway. I guess I've been unwinding doing that too. What game am I playing on the PC right now, though? I started playing a game from the 80s called Empire. Do you remember Empire? It's like a turn-based strategy game, like armies and and cities and stuff.
Text-based or
no? It looks like it.
Simple graphics.
Very simple, yeah. But no, I'm playing some other game. Oh, what? Oh, it's Pillars of the Earth, I think it's called.
Ooh.
It's based on Baldur's Gate. Do you remember Baldur's Gate? The D&D game?
Totally.
And but it's a brand new game. Pillars of the Earth 2, I think it is. And
it's on what? On PC?
PC, yeah. On Steam.
Wow.
And it's fun. But I don't know.
Like one of my favorite games was the Dark. What was it? No. It was based on Baldur's Gate, but it was like it came out on PS2.
Oh yeah.
Dark something.
I think it was on the first Xbox too.
Oh my god, I love that game so much.
Yeah. It was like a D&D type.
Yeah.
I will watch before I go to bed, when I know my brain isn't really working anymore, and I'm just sort of like, okay, it's the last half hour before I go to sleep. I just watch like YouTube clips that are suggested to me.
Oh yeah.
And for whatever reason, YouTube suggests that I watch a lot of SNL clips.
Oh, okay.
Saturday Night Live clips.
That would be good.
And what I have learned is that Saturday Night Live in the last 5 years has become generally funny.
Oh, what?
Like when I watch clips from 10, 15 years ago.
Terrible.
Unless it's one of the classics.
Yeah.
Like
like the Goat Boy. I'm kidding. I hated that.
Gunter from Sprockets, like.
Well, that's even older, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But so there are some good classics, but really like most of the skits from SNL prior to like
really
5 years ago, there was just like, okay, you can just tell the writing is bad and the acting isn't very good. But in the past 5 years, SNL, like I would say, at least of the ones they suggest to me, like I'm laughing out loud.
Oh,
like have you ever seen The Californians?
Oh, I guess I have. Yes.
Like that's a pretty funny one.
Yeah.
And then anything with Melissa McCarthy.
Right. She is.
Oh my
funny.
God! Like she's been on SNL like a few times at least, and there are. I mean, she.
But I only find her funny because out of affirmative action in my head.
Yeah. There's just one where Melissa McCarthy, she is applying for a loan. This would have been like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago on SNL. And she is, she's trying to get this pizza company going. And the guy's like, okay, well, there's a lot of pizza, stores in this town, but, let's look at your business proposal. She's like, no, I don't want to sell pizza. I want to eat pizza, because I read this book and it said, find what you're good at and, da-da-da. And he's like, you can't make money doing that. She's like, no,
that's my dream.
Let me explain. Like, pizza left out you don't know who's going to eat it. Well, that's when I come in. And I mean, I'm not giving it justice, but it's
I like the premise. It sounds funny.
It gives me a little bit of a wind down, or I like The Office clips or bloopers from Parks and Rec.
See, I need to try this because recently I've had the opposite problem because I have a hard time going to sleep because I end up watching news.
Oh boy,
it's terrible. You know what though? I recently found a new channel that I'm enjoying a lot, and because he does these pitch meetings for movies. Have you seen this one?
No.
I think it's called Screen Rant. I think that's the channel. But he does pitch meeting for, and then he goes through Avengers.
I've seen Screen Rant before, yeah.
Right, and so it's hilarious. So it's the same guy. He plays the role of like the studio producer on one side and the screenwriter on the other side, and it's great because he'll point out all the ridiculous things in all these movies, but as if he's pitching them as a movie, and it's pretty good. Right.
So get this. So get this. The pinnacle. Superman is about to kill Batman, and Batman says, "Martha, it's golden, right?" Yes, it is. Okay.
Get this. Han Solo. He's not just a loner.
Wait, don't spoil because some people might not have seen it.
Spoiler alert, he's not just a loner. He is Solo.
All right, another question, final question from FBL. Have you ever really hit it off with someone on the first meeting, platonic or romantic, but on the second meeting, everything fell flat and the rapport disappeared? Has that ever happened to you, Berto?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah?
So when I was 19, wait, was I 19? No. I was like 21.
Yeah. Let's drill down on that detail.
I was younger. Yes. Wait, was it 21 or 21 in 1 month? Yeah. Anyways, the point is, I asked a gal out, and she was younger than me by maybe 2 years. So maybe she's the one.
Yeah, let's drill down on that too.
God, I mean, the age difference matters for this story. The point is, she was younger. We went out.
How younger, bro?
And when we
how
met,
much younger? I need to know.
I need to know. When we met, we talked and it was wonderful and we like hit it off. We're like, wow, this is so fun. So I asked her out on a date. We went out on a date and it was like we had nothing in common.
Were you drunk and then sober? You know
yes. What I mean? yes. Yeah. But it was so night and day. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, that was a blast. I can't wait for our date. And then we had the date and everything I would bring up, it was like, wah, wah, you know?
The only person I can think of that popped into my head, famous Patron Lyndon, was it was about 20 years ago, and it was someone that I worked with. It was actually another therapist at my very first therapist job. And I don't remember if it was the second meeting, but it was like we had a couple hangout sessions where we were, you know, I don't know what you call it, but we hung out a few times. And I remember thinking like, oh, this guy might be a new friend. And then there was this one time we got together and we had this long conversation, I remember, in my apartment. And I remember we were sort of arguing, but I didn't know what we were arguing about. And I remember even in the middle, it was just like, what are we arguing about? But there was something about just his tone or the whole vibe, or I felt kind of bad for participating in the argument. And like after that, like we never hung out again.
Oh, wow.
You know, it wasn't like we hated each other. You know, it was more just like, well, I guess
scorched earth.
Yeah, I guess we're not friends. You know, I guess I don't want to hang out with you anymore. You know? It was probably mutual.
And it went unsaid.
And I remember, you know, the reason why it popped in my head is because it was totally what famous Patron Lyndon is saying. It's like you totally hit it off,
right? And
then one meeting, everything just kind of falls apart, but you don't know why. Because what Lyndon is saying, it's not like you get in a fight or they slap you. It's like something just strangely goes wrong.
Yeah.
So he's also asking, why do you think this happens, Berto?
Okay. Well, and you pointed to one reason, which was the first time I met this person that I was talking about. I was pretty inebriated, and in that mode, you know me, I am happy Berto. Well, unless I'm depressed, angry Berto. But if I'm not, I'm happy Berto. And happy Berto can be friends with almost anyone. And happy Berto is not that discerning about whether that would be a real friendship or not, right?
Well, and they were probably intoxicated.
Actually, they weren't.
Oh.
But I will say that Happy Berto can appear to be one way, and maybe that's not normal Happy Berto. Because Happy Drunk Berto won't talk about super geeky things that normal non-Happy Drunk Berto is probably into.
Right. I also imagine, again, I wasn't there, but actually I was. It was me. Is that when you are hanging out at a party or something?
Oh my gosh!
Like there's a lot of like, I don't know, freedom.
Okay, I'm gonna full disclosure, dude. It was at a strip club. It was at a strip club. So granted,
I was wondering, it's like, why would you be intoxicated and then?
That's why it was at a strip club, and so that already kind of gives you a lot of other reasons why it probably didn't work out the second time.
And she was working.
Yeah, and I asked her out, and she said yes, and we went on a date, and the date was horrible.
Interesting.
We had nothing in common.
Oh,
like at the strip club, I was like, woohoo! We're just having it was like someone's bachelor party or something, and it was like, whoa, right? And it was like, I don't even know. Actually, it wasn't a bachelor party. It was just a night in Seattle. It was like some random thing, and I was having a great time. I was just like on a roll that night, you know? So we were like, oh, we should talk about it. And we did, and then sober, and we tried to talk, and basically nothing I was into was something she knew or cared about, and everything she might have wanted to talk about, she didn't bring up anything, and so no, it's just like, so we had a date, and that was it.
All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.